Picture this. It is the morning of April 11th, 1945. American troops from the 507th Parachute Infantry are kicking down a massive oak door. They are entering the Villa Hugel in Essen, Germany. This isn't just a house. It is a 269-room palace with 8,000 square feet of living space. It is larger than the White House. Inside, sitting calmly in the library, is a tall, gaunt man. His name is Alfred Krupp. He is drinking coffee. Outside, his country is burning. The Third Reich is collapsing. Millions are dead. But Alfred is not panicking. He isn't packing a suitcase. He isn't trying to flee to Argentina like the others. He is simply waiting, because he knows a secret about the global economy that the soldiers don't. He knows that his family is too big to fail. For 400 years, the Krupp Dynasty had a simple business model. Find a war, sell to both sides, and if you lose, wait for the next one. They started as plague profiteers in 1587. They armed Napoleon in 1812. They built the cannons that destroyed Paris in 1870. They built the U-boats that sank Allied ships in 1916. And in World War II, they ran a private slave empire that makes modern corporate scandals look like a joke. They used 100,000 forced laborers. They designed the gas chambers. And yet, on that morning in 1945, Alfred Krupp knew he would walk away, a billionaire. To understand how he got away with it, we have to go back to the beginning, to a city filled with corpses. The year is 1587. The Black Death has returned to the city of Essen. People are dying in the streets. Families are fleeing the city in terror, leaving everything behind. But one man is walking toward the plague. His name is Arndt Krupp. He isn't a doctor. He is a merchant, and he sees the opportunity of a lifetime. While his neighbors are dying, Arndt is buying. He buys their houses. He buys their grazing land. He buys their livestock. He pays pennies on the dollar because the sellers are desperate to escape. By the time the plague burns itself out, Arndt Krupp is one of the richest men in the city. He established the DNA of the Krupp family right then and there. Most people see crisis as a tragedy. The Krupps see crisis as a clearance sale. For the next 200 years, the family grew quietly wealthy. They became the unspoken kings of Essen, but they were still just local landlords. They had money, but they didn't have power. To get power, they needed something stronger than real estate. They needed steel. And that brings us to 1811. Friedrich Krupp was the family failure. He didn't care about collecting rent. He was obsessed with a specific technology, crucible steel. At the time, the British had a monopoly on high-quality steel. It was the hardest metal on earth. The British guarded the formula like a state secret. If you were caught smuggling the technology, you went to prison. Friedrich didn't care. He built a small foundry in Essen. He spent the family fortune trying to reverse engineer the British process. He failed, again and again. By 1815, he had burned through his inheritance. The family was drowning in debt, but then geopolitics saved him. Napoleon Bonaparte launched the Continental System. He blockaded Europe to starve the British economy. Suddenly, British steel couldn't get into Germany. The market was wide open. Friedrich stepped into the gap. He didn't just sell steel for tools. He sold steel for violence. He began secretly selling materials to the French army. And simultaneously, he sold to the Prussians who were fighting the French. It was the first test of the neutral profit theory. Money has no nationality. But Friedrich died young and broke in 1826, leaving the company to his 14-year-old son. And this is where the story truly turns dark. Because that 14-year-old boy was Alfred Krupp, and he was a genius. Alfred Krupp was a strange man. He was a hypochondriac. He was terrified of drafts. He designed his mansion, Villa Hugel, with windows that could not open. He loved the smell of horse manure so much that he built his office above the stables. He believed the ammonia in the manure was good for his brain. But whatever he was smelling, it worked. Alfred realized that the world was about to change. The Industrial Revolution was starting, and the world needed two things: railroads and weapons. He started with railroads. In 1852, he invented the seamless railway tire. Before this, train wheels would crack at high speeds, causing massive derailments. Alfred forged a wheel from a single piece of steel. It didn't break. It was so successful that the three interlocking rings of the Krupp logo today represent 3 railway tires. But Alfred knew that railroads were just the funding mechanism. The real money was in artillery. He spent years perfecting a breech-loading steel cannon. Traditional cannons were made of bronze and loaded from the front. They were slow. They were heavy. Alfred's cannon was steel. It was light, and it could fire twice as fast as anything else in Europe. But the Prussian king didn't want it. The generals were old-fashioned. They liked their bronze guns. So Alfred did something unprecedented. He went to the 1851 Great Exhibition in London. He put his giant steel cannon on display right in the enemy's capital. He won the Best in Show award. Suddenly, every king, tsar, and emperor in the world wanted a Krupp gun. The Prussian military looked foolish. They had to buy his guns now. Alfred had forced his own government to become his customer by arming their rivals first. It was a masterclass in leverage, but a weapon is only a theory until you use it. The real test came in 1870, the Franco-Prussian War. On one side, the French army with their traditional bronze cannons. On the other, the Prussians with Alfred's steel breech-loaders. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. At the Battle of Sedan, the Krupp cannons decimated the French lines from 2 kilometers away. The French couldn't even see who was killing them. The Prussians won the war in months. Alfred Krupp became a national hero. They called him the Cannon King. He was personally invited to the proclamation of the German Empire at Versailles. But here is the detail that gets left out of history books. While his cannons were killing French soldiers, Alfred was checking his ledger, because he had also sold cannons to the French before the war. He was collecting royalties on the guns that were shooting at his own countrymen. He didn't care. Business was booming. By the time Alfred died in 1887, he employed 20,000 people. He had created a state within a state. Krupp workers had their own hospitals, their own bakeries, their own retirement funds. They were loyal to Krupp first and Germany second. But Alfred left behind a dangerous legacy. He had tied the family fortune directly to the German military machine. If the military stopped fighting, Krupp stopped earning. So they had to ensure the fighting never stopped. Fast forward to 1902, Alfred's son, Fritz, dies in a scandal. He leaves the entire empire to his daughter, Bertha Krupp. There was just one problem. It's 1902. German law and German society did not allow a woman to run an industrial empire. The Kaiser himself, Wilhelm II, stepped in. He couldn't let the state's weapons manufacturer fall apart. So the Kaiser played matchmaker. He found a diplomat named Gustav von Bohlen. He was stiff, obedient, and loyal. The Kaiser ordered them to marry, but he added a strange condition. Gustav had to change his name. He couldn't just be Gustav von Bohlen. He became Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Hellbach. The name, Krupp, was so important to the state that it superseded the husband's identity. Gustav took the job seriously. He became more Krupp than the Krupps. He ramped up production for the next big event. The First World War I, was the first industrial war. And it was the Krupp family's masterpiece. By 1914, the company had 82,000 employees. They produced everything: shells, armor plating, U-boats, and the most terrifying weapon of the war, Big Bertha, named after Gustav's wife, This was a 42-centimeter howitzer. It could fire a shell weighing nearly a ton. It smashed the Belgian forts in days. But they didn't stop there. In 1918, they unveiled the Paris gun. This weapon defied physics. It had a barrel 112 feet long. It could fire a shell 75 miles into the stratosphere. It bombarded Paris from a distance so great that the Parisians thought they were being bombed by a high-altitude Zeppelin. The Krupps were printing money. Their profits quadrupled between 1914 and 1918. But then, the music stopped. November 1918. Germany surrenders. The Treaty of Versailles is signed. And the Allies have one specific goal: destroy Krupp. Article 168 of the treaty specifically ordered the destruction of Krupp machinery. The factory was dismantled. The workers were fired. Gustav Krupp was declared a war criminal, though he was never tried. The company was allowed to make only agricultural equipment: pots, pans, tractors. It seemed like the end, but remember the family motto: crisis is a clearance sale. Gustav Krupp didn't stop making weapons. He just moved them. In the 1920s, while UN inspectors were checking his factories in Essen... Gustav was moving his blueprints abroad. He bought a controlling interest in Bofors, a Swedish arms manufacturer. He set up a shell company in the Netherlands called IVS. German engineers traveled to Sweden and Holland in civilian clothes. They continued designing tanks and submarines. Back in Germany, they built agricultural tractors. These tractors just happened to have the exact engine specifications and chassis weight of a Panzer tank. They were building the skeleton of the Wehrmacht right under the nose of the world. But they needed a political vehicle to bring it home. They needed a leader who would tear up the Treaty of Versailles. Enter Adolf Hitler. Now, this is important. Gustav Krupp originally despised Hitler. He thought the Nazis were chaotic street thugs. But in 1933, Hitler became chancellor. And he invited the top industrialists to a meeting at the Reichstag president's palace. Hitler laid out his plan. We are going to rearm. We are going to destroy the unions. We are going to conquer the East. Gustav Krupp listened. He did the math. Rearmament meant billions in contracts. Destroying unions meant lower labor costs. Gustav stood up. He pledged the support of German industry to the Nazi Party. He began paying a Hitler levy to fund the SS. The deal was done. The devil had his steel. By 1940, Gustav was senile. His son Alfred took over. Alfred was a true believer. He joined the SS in 1938, and he turned the company into a monster. As the German army swept across Europe, Alfred followed. When the Nazis conquered a country, Alfred inspected the steel mills. In France, in Holland, in Ukraine, he seized the factories. He stripped the machinery and sent it back to Essen. But machinery is useless without labor, and all the German men were soldiers. So Alfred innovated. He requested slave labor from the SS. He didn't just accept them, he demanded them. Krupp built labor camps right next to his factories. He employed 100,000 forced laborers, prisoners of war, Jewish concentration camp inmates, civilians kidnapped from the streets of Kiev. The conditions were medieval. In the Bertha Works factory, workers slept in unheated shacks in the winter. They were fed a watery soup. If they collapsed, they were beaten. If they died, they were replaced. Documents show that Alfred personally approved the request for 2,000 Jewish workers from Buchenwald. But it gets worse. Krupp built a fuse factory inside the Auschwitz complex. It was called the Weichsel Union Plant. The workers were leased directly from the death camp. Krupp paid the SS 4 marks per day for a skilled worker, 3 marks for an unskilled one. The life expectancy of a Krupp slave was a few months. Alfred Krupp looked at a spreadsheet of human lives, and he optimized it for profit. By 1944, the Krupp family fortune was uncalculable. But the war was turning. The Allies were bombing Essen. The Villa Hugel was shaking from the blasts. Which brings us back to that library in 1945. Alfred was arrested. He was put on trial at Nuremberg in the Krupp case. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutors produced the letters requesting slaves. They produced the financial records showing profits from stolen factories. Alfred didn't deny the facts. His defense was simple. I was following orders. If I refused, Hitler would have shot me. The judges didn't buy it. In 1948, Alfred Krupp was found guilty of crimes against humanity and the plunder of property. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. And then came the hammer blow. The court ordered the confiscation of his entire property. 100% of the Krupp empire. The factories, the mines, the mansions. Everything. It was the harshest financial penalty ever levied against an individual. Alfred was sent to Landsberg prison. He was wearing a prisoner's uniform. The dynasty was dead, or so it seemed. But remember the year. It is 1948. The Soviet Union is blockading Berlin. The Cold War has begun. The United States looks at the map. They see Soviet tanks positioned in East Germany. They need a shield. They need West Germany to be strong. And West Germany cannot be strong without steel. The American High Commissioner in Germany was a man named John J. McCloy. He was a pragmatist. He was lobbied heavily by American industrialists who were terrified. If they could confiscate Krupp's property, could they confiscate American property too? McCloy made a calculation. In January 1951, he issued a general pardon. He opened the gates of Landsberg prison. Alfred Krupp walked out. But McCloy didn't just free the man. He reversed the property confiscation. He handed Alfred back his company. Every factory, every mine, every dollar. Overnight, the convicted war criminal was once again the richest man in Europe. He promised to pay reparations to his Jewish slave laborers. He paid them $1,200 each, a fraction of his profits. The vultures of Essen had survived again. Alfred went back to work. He rebuilt the company in the 1950s. He rode the wave of the German economic miracle. He died in 1967, but the biological line was failing. Alfred had only one son, Arndt von Bohlen und Haldock. Arndt was not like his father. He was not like his grandfather. He wore heavy makeup. He wrapped himself in furs. He spent his time in Thailand and Morocco hosting lavish parties. He had zero interest in blast furnaces or balance sheets. The company executives were terrified. If Arndt took over, the company would collapse in a year, so they made a deal. The German government and the Krupp Foundation approached Arndt. Give up your inheritance rights. We will pay you a cash stipend of 2 million marks a year, and you can keep your castles. Arndt took the money. He renounced his claim to the throne. On the day he signed the papers, the 400-year-old Krupp Dynasty officially ended as a family business. It became a corporate foundation. Arndt lived out the rest of his life as a jet-set playboy. He died of throat cancer in 1986, the last of the bloodline. But the company didn't die. It kept growing. And in 1999, it made one final move to consolidate power. It merged with its historic rival, Thyssen. The Thyssen family had a different story. Fritz Thyssen had funded Hitler, yes, but he had turned against him. He ended up in a concentration camp. Now, the good Nazi victim and the bad Nazi profiteer were joined at the hip. They formed ThyssenKrupp. Today, it is an industrial titan. They have 100,000 employees. They operate in 78 countries. If you ride an elevator in One World Trade Center in New York, you are riding a ThyssenKrupp elevator. If you look at the suspension of a modern Audi, it's ThyssenKrupp steel. If you look at the propellers of a NATO submarine, it's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems. The name Krupp is still stamped on the metal. The 3 rings are still the logo. The blood has been washed off, but the steel remains. So, here is the uncomfortable truth. We like to believe that history punishes the wicked. We like to believe that if you help commit genocide, you don't get to keep the money. But the story of the Krupp family proves otherwise. They bet on the wrong side of 2 world wars. They committed atrocities that defy imagination. And yet, they didn't just survive. They won. Alfred Krupp died on his yacht, not in a cell. His company is the backbone of the European economy. It forces us to ask a question about the world we live in today. When a corporation becomes too big to fail, does it also become too big to jail? If a modern tech giant or defense contractor committed crimes tomorrow, would they face justice? Or would they get a pardon because they are strategically important? I want to hear your verdict. Should the Krupp assets have been seized forever in 1948? Or was rebuilding Germany more important than punishing one family? Drop your opinion in the comments. Justice or pragmatism? And if you want to see how the American versions of these families operate, you need to watch this video on the Rockefellers next, because while Krupp mastered steel, Rockefeller mastered the oil that fueled it. Click here to watch that now. I'll see you there.